Hello everyone. My name is Melissa Irving. I'm 35 years old. And last Christmas Eve, I stood in the doorway of my childhood home as my father hurled my wrapped gifts into the snow, while my brother slow clapped, and 15 relatives cheered as if they were watching some twisted holiday performance. What none of them knew was that the house they were defending so loudly had legally belonged to me for 3 years, and that their little spectacle of humiliation was the exact trigger that would end with the police removing every last one of them before the night was over. Before I continue, please like this video, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from. It means more than you know, and it helps me share stories like this one, where quiet truth finally speaks louder than family mythology. Now let's go back to the moment everything snapped. The warmth inside 129 Pinecrest Avenue hit me the moment I stepped in. Pine-scented candles, golden lights, holiday music drifting through the hallway. On any other night, it might have felt nostalgic, but tonight it felt staged, performed. A room full of people waiting for the next act. I set my coat down. That was all it took. Douglas, my father, strode forward holding a thick packet of documents like he'd been rehearsing this entrance. His voice carried across the room. "Melissa, we need your signature tonight, before the banks close." The conversations died instantly. Champagne glasses paused mid-air. Garrett appeared beside him, wearing that polished grin, the one he used whenever he wanted the room to remember he was the Irving they valued. "Just a small family formality," he said. "We're using the house as collateral. You'll sign." I took the papers. $520,000 loan application, my signature as co-guarantor. The corners of my vision tightened. "This requires me to take on $500,000 of your debt," I said quietly. Garrett scoffed. "You make nearly 200 grand a year. Don't be dramatic." Douglas's expression hardened. "This is our home. You will help your family." I inhaled slowly, then handed the documents back. "I'm not signing." The silence turned electric. Garrett barked a laugh. "There she is, the selfish one," Aunt Patricia chimed in. "Your parents sacrificed everything for you." Uncle Anthony added, "Garrett's been supporting them for years." Every lie, every myth they'd used to crown him the hero and cast me the villain spilled out effortlessly. And then Douglas delivered the blow he'd been storing for years. "You are a disappointment, Melissa. If you won't help this family, then get out of my house." He grabbed the gifts I'd placed under the tree, carefully wrapped gold ribbon tied by hand, and marched to the open door. Snow whipped into the room as he flung the presents into the yard, where they burst against the ice. Garrett started slow clapping. 1 clap, 2. Then the entire room followed. The humiliation was deliberate, public, performed. I slipped my phone into my pocket, the glowing red recording icon capturing every word. "Say it again," I said quietly. Douglas shouted, "Get out, and don't come back!" I nodded. Gladly. I stepped onto the porch. Snow landed on my hair, melting slow trails of cold across my skin. My gifts lay scattered, edges soaking through, ribbons unraveling like severed ties. Behind me, laughter erupted, loud, careless, triumphant. They thought they'd broken me. They thought I'd walk away wounded and silent. They thought tonight was their victory. They didn't know I had just recorded their 4th lease violation. They didn't know I owned the house they'd thrown me out of. And they didn't know that in a few hours, I would be driving past this same porch, watching police cars pull up to explain the one truth they never imagined. This was never their house. Snow was still drifting through the air as I drove away from Pinecrest Avenue, my hands steady on the steering wheel even as my chest tightened. The humiliation still burned on my skin, but under it was something else, an old ache I'd carried for years, the kind that forms slowly, layer by layer, until it becomes part of you. And to understand why that night cut so deep, you need to know what the last 8 years of my life looked like beneath the surface. For 8 straight years, without missing a single month, I sent $3,500 home. Automatic transfer. First of every month, rain or shine. While building designs for the Ridgeview Design Group, while pulling 80-hour weeks, while climbing the ranks faster than anyone my age had ever done, I made sure my parents, Douglas and Marilyn, never fell behind on medical bills, utilities, taxes, repairs. It wasn't generosity. It was survival, for them. When Mom's arthritis medication jumped to nearly $800 a month, I covered it. When Dad's retirement funds mysteriously evaporated, long before I learned about the gambling, I filled the gap. When the water heater burst in 2020, I paid the plumber directly because they didn't want to bother Garrett. I kept every statement, every email, every transfer confirmation. Not because I planned to use them, but because architects document everything. A building stands because every beam, every bolt, every hidden joint has proof behind it. I treated my family the same way, always preparing for the day truth might matter. But in the Irving household, truth was optional. Image was everything. And nothing fed an image like Garrett. Garrett, 3 years older, endlessly charming, chronically irresponsible, had been the future of the Irving family since we were kids. He could make a paper airplane, and Dad would brag about his engineering potential. I won regional architecture competitions, and Dad would pat my shoulder and say, "That's nice, honey. Don't let it distract you from supporting your brother someday." That line, I didn't realize how literal he meant it. In the last 8 years, my $340,000 in quiet support slowly got rewritten in family lore as Garrett's generosity. Mom would phone me after doctor appointments saying, "Garrett took care of the bill again. He's so good to us." Meanwhile, I had the receipts sitting neatly in my desk drawer. On holidays, Garrett would raise his glass, modestly shrugging, as relatives praised how he looked after his parents. He never corrected them, not once. And I learned something important. Silence is also a lie. All of that reached its breaking point that Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving 2024. 17 days before Christmas Eve. The night everything started unraveling, the dining room was packed. 15 relatives squeezed around the long oak table, the same table where I'd done my homework growing up. The turkey was perfectly carved, the air warm with cinnamon and rosemary, but all anyone cared about was Garrett. He stood at the head of the table, swirling a glass of Pinot Noir like he'd invented wine tasting. "North Peak Analytics is about to close a $5 million Series B," he announced. "Japanese investors are fighting for a bigger stake. We're aiming for an IPO by Q3 next year." The room erupted in applause. Dad clapped hardest. "My brilliant son," he said proudly, resting a hand on Garrett's shoulder. "He's carrying this family into the future." Garrett smiled modestly, the practiced kind. Then Dad turned to me, almost as an afterthought. "Oh, and Melissa also has a job." The words hung in the air like a crumb brushed from the table. A job. I was earning $185,000 a year. I had just become the youngest principal architect in Ridgeview's history. I was leading the design team for the Seattle waterfront redevelopment, a $60 million civic project that would reshape the city skyline. But in that room, in that family, I was simply someone who also had a job. Cousin Bethany asked, "Melissa, what exactly do you do again?" Before I could open my mouth, Garrett chimed in with a chuckle. "She draws buildings or something." Then he launched right back into a story about his expansion into Asian markets. I sat there, heat rising in my chest, swallowing 1,000 words that would never matter to them. When the table erupted in admiration again, I quietly excused myself and walked to the kitchen to help Mom, who was struggling with the turkey platter. "You know," she said softly, without looking at me, "your brother works so hard keeping this family afloat. You should take note." I didn't respond. Because what was the point? I'd been paying for her medication since 2019. I'd covered the specialist who treated her last year. Garrett hadn't contributed a penny, not since 2018, when he tried to invest their savings in some crypto scheme that vanished within weeks. But in their minds, Garrett was the devoted son, and I was convenient, quiet, replaceable. When I drove home that night, the city lights of Seattle blurred through my windshield as a thought formed slowly at the back of my mind. They will never see me, unless something forces them to. 17 days later, that something came. A phone call from Garrett during my lunch break at the office. "Mel, we need to talk about the house situation," he said, voice tight. The house situation. That was how he described being nearly $520,000 in debt, his investors pulling out, lawsuits looming, and his entire startup on the brink of collapse. I leaned back in my office chair, feeling the familiar edge in his voice, the one he used when he needed money but wanted the request to sound heroic. "I need you to co-sign some paperwork," he continued. "Just a formality." A formality. Using the family home, 129 Pinecrest Avenue, as collateral for $500,000, and that was the moment I knew the crash was coming. Not mine, theirs, because the house they were planning to mortgage, the house they believed Dad had provided for us all these years, the house they thought I owed them loyalty for, had been owned by my company Irving Pines LLC since 2021. A secret I had carried alone, a truth they weren't ready to face, a truth that would rip through Christmas Eve like a storm, and all Garrett said was, "You'll sign it, right? For the family?" Garrett's voice still echoed in my head as I sat in my office at Ridgeview Design Group, the Seattle skyline glowing blue through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I had ended the call politely, because politeness is a habit you learn when you grow up in a family where confrontation only leads to deeper wounds. But the shake in his tone stayed with me. The kind of shake a person gets when the facade they've been polishing for years starts to crack. "Just a formality," he'd said. "Just for the family." Those words spun together in my mind like dust caught in sunlight, soft, harmless, but blinding. I already knew what I would find in the documents. Garrett always called me when he wanted something, or when he was about to lose everything. That afternoon, when his email finally arrived, I opened the attachment slowly, like peeling back a bandage you know is hiding an infection. Loan application, $520,000. Collateral, 129 Pinecrest Avenue. Co-guarantor, Melissa Irving. Exactly as expected. I read every line anyway, not because I needed clarification, but because Garrett counted on people not paying attention to details. He built entire fantasies on that assumption. But I am an architect. Details are the only reason buildings stand. And this building, the one he planned to mortgage without my knowledge, had a foundation he didn't know about, a foundation with my name on it. I sat back in my chair and exhaled slowly. A familiar ache pressed against my ribs. 8 years of invisible contributions, rewritten memories, erased sacrifices. And now they wanted my signature so Garrett could pretend he was still the brilliant son who kept the family afloat. But there was something he didn't understand. You can't mortgage a house you don't own. As the office hummed around me, phones ringing, designers debating sketches, the espresso machine hissing somewhere down the hall, I opened the bottom drawer of my cabinet and unlocked a narrow metal safe. Inside was a single thick folder. Irving Pines, LLC. Formed July 2021. Sole member, Melissa Irving. I slid the documents out and rested them on my desk. The deed of sale, the foreclosure papers, the lease agreement, the civility and conduct clause, and my attorney Jennifer's handwritten note from 3 years ago. Protect yourself. They won't understand this now, but they will someday. The memory of that summer rose in my mind like a fog rolling in over the Puget Sound, slow, cold, inescapable. Chapter. It started with a random notification on my phone in 2021, a credit monitoring alert about a lien placed on the family home. Confused, I called the bank. The voice on the line was polite but clinical as they explained. "Mr. Irving has defaulted on multiple payments. The property at 129 Pinecrest Avenue is in foreclosure." Defaulted? Multiple payments? Foreclosure? I remember sitting there, staring at the rain streaking down my office window, feeling the ground tilt under me. My father had always projected financial stability, confidence, control. The idea that he could lose the house, the place where Mom kept her holiday china, where Garrett and I marked our heights on the pantry frame, felt impossible. Until the clerk said the number. Outstanding balance, $400,000. I didn't know then that it was gambling debt. That revelation came months later, ripped out of Douglas like a confession he had been forced into rather than one he offered willingly. But that day, all I knew was that the house was scheduled for auction in 2 weeks. 2 weeks until strangers walked through the place that held every childhood memory I had. I could have confronted him. I could have begged him to tell me the truth. But I knew my father. Pride ruled him. Shame fueled him. He would sooner let the house burn than admit he needed me. So I chose a different path. 5 days later, Irving Pines LLC was formed, named after the street, wrapped in an identity he couldn't trace back to me. I went to the foreclosure auction with a cashier's check for $145 million, my hands trembling as I lifted my bidding paddle. It was terrifying. It was heavy. It was necessary. The flippers who showed up that day were efficient, impersonal, calculating. They saw a profit opportunity. I saw the only way to save what little family structure we had left. When the gavel fell and the auctioneer said, "Sold to Irving Pines LLC," the breath I'd been holding finally escaped. The house was safe, but safety requires boundaries. Jennifer, my attorney, and one of the few people who actually understood my family, drafted a lease agreement so airtight that even the most dramatic Irving meltdown couldn't puncture it. $1 a year in rent. Renewable annually, and the clause she insisted on, civility and conduct. Clause violations, verbal abuse, public humiliation, false accusations, hostile actions, consequences. First violation, written warning. Second, formal notice. Third, final warning. Fourth, immediate termination of tenancy. At the time, it felt extreme. By the end of 2024, it felt prophetic. Because the truth is, they'd already burned through 3 violations long before Christmas Eve. Violation 1. Dad calling me a failure at Mom's birthday in 2022. Violation 2. Garrett telling my colleagues I was mentally unstable in 2023. Violation 3. Dad announcing at Thanksgiving that I was a disappointment to the Irving name. Each warning meticulously documented. Each notice delivered and signed. Each one ignored. By December 20th, when Garrett called about the loan, the fuse was already lit. He just didn't realize how short it had become. Back in my office, I placed the loan paperwork and the deed side by side on the desk. On one side, Garrett Irving, requesting my signature out of entitlement. On the other, my own legal ownership of the house he thought Dad controlled. The contrast was poetic in the saddest way. I picked up my phone and texted him, "Send the full documentation. I'll review it." He responded instantly. He was desperate enough not to question the calm in my tone. And as I leaned back in my chair, Seattle's winter sun sinking behind the harbor, I whispered something I hadn't allowed myself to say aloud until then. "This time, you won't rewrite the story, Garrett. Not this time." Because they weren't just asking me to save the house. They were asking me to mortgage something they didn't know they'd already lost. And in 4 days, on Christmas Eve, they would finally learn the truth. December 23rd arrived with a kind of brittle cold that felt personal, like the air itself was warning me to brace for impact. I woke to 3 missed calls from Mom, 2 from Aunt Patricia, and a wall of text messages that stacked on my screen like an avalanche. "Your brother is under so much pressure. Family comes first, Melissa. Don't embarrass us. Just sign the loan and stop being difficult. Garrett is trying to save the house. The house. Their house. The one none of them realized they hadn't owned in years." By noon, the messages had grown sharper. "Selfish. You've changed. Garrett always supports your parents. You owe this family." And then a gem from cousin Derek, the same cousin who once borrowed $5,000 from me and never repaid a cent. "Loyalty is everything, Melissa. I stared at it, incredulous. Loyalty from a man who vanished every time responsibility appeared? It would have been laughable if it weren't so predictable. At 2:14 p.m., my phone lit up with Aunt Patricia's name. I let it ring out. Then it rang again, and again. On the fourth call, I picked up, not out of desire, but because I knew exactly what narrative Garrett had spun, and I needed to hear it in its full, embellished glory. "Melissa," she snapped before I could say hello, "I cannot believe you are forcing your brother into this position. He is trying to protect Douglas and Marilyn, and you're sitting there in your fancy job acting like you're above helping your own family." I closed my eyes, inhaling deeply, feeling the exhaustion of 8 years settle into my bones. "Aunt Patricia," I said calmly, "I've been helping this family for a long time." "By doing what?" she scoffed. "Sending birthday cards?" I almost laughed. Almost. But the anger beneath her ignorance wasn't hers alone. It was the result of Garrett's storytelling. He had painted himself as the devoted son struggling to save the household while his cold, successful sister refused to lift a finger. The irony was suffocating. Before I could respond, her voice sharpened. "You're betraying everything we stand for. Sign the papers, Melissa." She hung up before I could answer. The phone buzzed again, this time Mom. "Sweetheart," she said in that soft, trembling tone she used when she wanted something, "Garrett is doing everything he can to keep us afloat. He's the only one looking after us." The only one. That line hit me harder than I expected. I pressed my palm against my forehead. "Mom, Please," she whispered, cutting me off. "Don't make a scene on Christmas Eve. 15 people are coming. Just sign the documents so the family can stay united. Family unity." A phrase that, in our household, had always translated to, "Melissa, sacrifice yourself quietly." When I hung up, the silence of my condo felt strangely loud. I stood by the window overlooking downtown Seattle, the hum of traffic below, the holiday lights glowing on every street corner, and for a moment, I wondered if saying nothing all these years had left me invisible even to myself. By 6 p.m., the situation escalated. My phone buzzed nonstop. "Garrett told us you're hoarding money while the family suffers. You should be ashamed. Why won't you help your parents?" "Melissa, this is your fault." Garrett had gone all in. He'd positioned himself as the collapsed hero, fighting alone while his burdenless sister clung to her success. It was the perfect narrative for a family that had always been allergic to my accomplishments but addicted to Garrett's potential. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something I wasn't proud of. Isolation. Not the quiet kind I'd gotten used to, the kind you simply live with. This was different. This was weaponized, designed, engineered by people who knew exactly which buttons to push. I sat on my couch, phone vibrating beside me, and let the exhaustion sink in. I had spent years protecting people who would never protect me back. Years shouldering the financial burdens they refused to acknowledge. Years staying small so Garrett could feel big. But that night, December 23rd, was the moment something shifted in me. A hardening, a clarity, a breaking of some final delicate thread. Because if they wanted to cast me as the villain for simply refusing to sign away $500,000? If they wanted to vilify me for refusing to mortgage a home that wasn't theirs? If they wanted to corner me into compliance? Then they were about to learn what happens when the quiet one decides she's done being quiet. At 8:37 p.m., I opened the camera app on my phone. My thumb hovered above the record button. Not yet, not for this moment, for tomorrow, Christmas Eve. I realized then that walking into that house unarmed, emotionally or legally, would be walking into an ambush. I knew my family, their tactics, their escalation patterns. I knew how quickly accusation became spectacle, and I knew without any doubt that they would try to break me publicly. But what they didn't know was that I had been documenting their behavior for years, that the civility and conduct clause they signed wasn't decorative, that the warnings they shrugged off weren't empty, that one more violation, just one, would activate immediate termination of tenancy, a clause they never bothered to read. A clause written precisely for people who believed my silence meant I couldn't fight back. And so I made a decision that would change everything. Tomorrow, I would record. Not out of vengeance, not out of spite, but out of necessity. Because the only way to expose people committed to rewriting history is to give them a truth they can't erase. I set my phone down, exhaled, and allowed my heartbeat to settle. Tomorrow, they would push me. Tomorrow, they would humiliate me. Tomorrow, they would try to destroy me. But tomorrow was also the day the story turned. They just didn't know it yet. Christmas Eve arrived with a quiet stillness, the kind that feels almost sacred, until it isn't. I drove toward 129 Pinecrest Avenue, the familiar Victorian rising like a memory I used to love and now could barely recognize. My fingers grazed my pocket, feeling the slight weight of my phone. The camera app sat pinned to my home screen, ready. I didn't want to record my family, but I knew they would force my hand. The neighborhood glowed with warm lights. Wreaths hung on every door. Children ran across lawns, leaving trails in the snow. And then there was our house, my house, bursting with noise, music, and the laughter of 15 people who had already decided tonight's villain. I stepped inside. Heat rushed toward me, carrying the scent of pine, cinnamon, and false cheer. The living room was packed. Garrett near the fireplace, Aunt Patricia swirling champagne, Uncle Anthony retelling some exaggerated version of how family sticks together. The moment I crossed the threshold, conversations dimmed to whispers. I placed my coat over the back of a chair. The room watched. Marilyn appeared behind me. "Please don't make tonight harder than it has to be," she murmured, eyes avoiding mine. Harder for who? But I swallowed the words. Nothing I said would matter anymore. Douglas emerged from the hallway holding a thick packet of papers, the loan documents. He held them like a weapon, or maybe a trophy. "Melissa," he announced loudly, "we need this signed tonight before the banks close." His voice carried across the room, perfectly engineered to draw attention. I met his eyes, calm, controlled. "Dad, we talked about this. I can't sign." "You will sign," he snapped. "This is our family home, and if you cared about us at all, you'd do your part." Garrett chimed in smoothly, almost cheerfully. "Let's not drag this out, Mel. Everyone knows you can afford it." I felt the phone in my pocket, and I tapped record. "What documents?" Aunt Patricia asked loudly, as if she'd been waiting for her cue. Garrett stepped forward. "Just some family paperwork. Melissa is helping us secure a loan. Helping, not coerced, helping." I took the packet, letting the silence swell. Then, "This requires me to guarantee $520,000. Using a house I can't use as collateral." Douglas's face darkened. "Don't get clever with us. This is my house. You grew up here." Garrett folded his arms, enjoying himself. "Stop being dramatic, Mel. Sign the papers." I held the documents gently, then lowered them. "I can't." It was as if the air cracked. Garrett barked a laugh. "Of course you won't. Classic Melissa, big career, bigger ego." Aunt Patricia stepped closer. "Your parents have done everything for you." Uncle Anthony added, "Garrett has been supporting them for years. You can't give a little?" It kept coming. Accusations, rehearsed lines, resentment polished into performance. Then Douglas delivered the blow. "You are a disappointment," he said coldly. "After everything we sacrificed for you, when the family needs help, you turn your back." But I kept recording. Garrett seized the moment. "She earns nearly 200 grand a year and still," he gestured dramatically, "nothing, not even when we're trying to save the house." Save the house. He had no idea how ironic that was. I lifted my gaze to him. "Name one bill you've paid in the last 5 years. He froze, just for a second, but it was enough. Mom knows what I contribute," he stammered. Marilyn's eyes dropped to the floor. The room sensed weakness and shifted, hungry for a new target. Unfortunately, that target was still me. Aunt Patricia hissed, "Don't disrespect your brother." Douglas's voice grew louder, angrier. "If you refuse to help this family, you can get out of my house." The recording captured every word with crystal clarity, and then, as if possessed by some cruel instinct, Douglas grabbed the gifts I'd placed under the tree, each one carefully wrapped, each one chosen individually, and stormed to the open front door. "Get out!" He hurled them into the snow, ribbons snapping, boxes bursting, gifts scattering across the white lawn like broken pieces of something I once believed in. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Garrett started slow clapping. "Oh, finally!" he laughed. "Dad actually stood up to her." The applause spread. 15 relatives clapping, celebrating, cheering the moment I was humiliated publicly in my own childhood house. Marilyn turned away, disappearing into the kitchen without a word. Garrett smirked, basking in the performance. "Don't come back, Mel. Ever." I lifted my chin. "Say that again, for clarity." Douglas stepped forward, voice booming. "This is my house. If you won't help your family, get out." I nodded. "Thank you." My voice was steady, almost serene. I slipped my phone into my coat pocket, its red icon glowing through the fabric, and walked slowly toward the door. The room watched, expecting tears, a breakdown, a plea. They didn't get one. Instead, I said, "I'll go, gladly." As I stepped outside, snow drifted down onto the scattered gifts, their bright paper soaking through. My hands trembled only slightly as I pulled on my gloves. Behind me, through the walls, I heard laughter, toasting, celebrating the exile of the daughter who had quietly kept their lights on for years. I walked down the path, past the family photos lining the hallway. Only Garrett in every frame. Not a single picture of me, not one. The cold bit at my cheeks, sharp and bracing. I reached my car, put the keys in the ignition, and exhaled. 47 minutes of footage had already uploaded to the cloud. The fourth violation, public humiliation, documented in perfect audio and 4K. I picked up my phone. "Jennifer," I said when she answered. "Yes, it's time. Execute the termination immediately." She paused. "On Christmas Eve?" "They just threw me out of my own house," I replied softly. "And I have it all on camera." Her tone shifted. "Understood. I'll contact the police liaison." I made one more call. 911, the dispatcher answered. "What's your emergency?" "This is Melissa Irving," I said calmly. "I need to report trespassers at 129 Pinecrest Avenue. I'm the legal property owner, and they're refusing to leave." As I ended the call, the snow began falling harder, blurring the edges of the streetlights. They thought they had destroyed me tonight. But what they didn't know, what they could never have predicted, was that this was the moment the story flipped. The moment the scapegoat stopped playing her part. The moment the landlord came home. Blue and red lights began reflecting off the snow before I even pulled away from Pinecrest Avenue. They painted the street in sharp, blinking color. Cold, rhythmic warnings slicing through the warm glow still pouring from the windows of the house I once called home. I parked half a block away, watching from the quiet of my car as 2 patrol vehicles rolled to a stop in front of 129 Pinecrest Avenue. Snowflakes drifted lazily around them, softening the edges of a scene that was about to become anything but soft. My phone buzzed. "Jennifer Lang, I'm 2 minutes out. Don't approach until I arrive." I exhaled slowly. My attorney always knew how to keep things steady, even when the world felt like it was tilting under my feet. Inside the house, shadows moved across the curtains. Silhouettes of people still laughing, drinking, celebrating the moment they believed they'd finally put me in my place. They had no idea I was sitting in a warm car, watching the officers approach their home with eviction papers and county records in hand. 2 minutes later, headlights approached and a sleek black BMW parked beside me. Jennifer stepped out, her breath turning to fog in the air. She tapped my window. "Are you ready?" she asked when I opened the door. "I've been ready for 3 years," I said quietly. We walked together toward the house, the crunch of our boots echoing across the frozen lawn. Mrs. Keller, the neighbor, was standing on her porch, phone in hand, disbelief on her face. When she spotted me, she gave a small nod of solidarity. The officers, Detective Sarah Monroe and Officer Delgado, stood at the door. Douglas opened it with the satisfaction of a man expecting victory. "There she is," he announced, pointing at me. "Finally, you can take her away for harassment or trespassing or whatever it is she's pulling." Detective Monroe didn't blink. "Sir, are you Douglas Irving?" "Yes, that's me. And this is my house." "Actually," she said, her voice level and professional, "we're here regarding illegal occupancy of this property." The room behind him fell silent. Douglas frowned. "What are you talking about? We own this house." Detective Monroe lifted her tablet, scrolling once. "According to King County property records, this house is owned by Irving Pines LLC. It has been since July 2021. For a full 3 seconds, no one breathed. Garrett appeared behind Dad, confusion clouding his face. What did you say?" "Irving Pines LLC," Monroe repeated. "Sole member, Melissa Irving." Gasps rippled through the room. Aunt Patricia's champagne flute slipped from her hand, shattering on the hardwood. Uncle Anthony muttered, "That's impossible." Douglas's face drained of color. "Check again," he barked. "There must be a mistake." Monroe tapped her tablet. "I've checked 3 times. This property was foreclosed in 2021 and purchased at auction by Irving Pines LLC for $1.45 million. The silence became suffocating. Garrett's voice cracked. "But I thought the investor—" Dad said, Mom said. Jennifer stepped forward, holding a neatly organized folder. "I believe these documents will clarify everything." She handed the folder to Monroe, who flipped it open. The deed, the auction certificate, the lease agreement, Douglas and Marilyn's signatures, dated 3 years prior. Douglas stumbled backward. "What is this? This can't be. Why didn't anyone tell me?" Jennifer's voice was calm and razor-sharp. "You signed a lease agreement in 2021, Mr. Irving, one that allowed you to rent this property for $1 a year." More gasps. Someone whispered, "$1?" Monroe continued. "The agreement also includes a civility and conduct clause. Violations include verbal abuse, humiliation, and hostile actions toward any family member." She lifted her gaze toward me. "And tonight, Ms. Irving submitted video evidence documenting a 4th violation." Garrett stiffened. "This is ridiculous. Melissa is twisting everything. She's lying." I reached into my coat and held up my phone. "Am I?" I pressed play. Douglas's voice filled the house. "This is my house. If you won't help your family, get out." Garrett's slow clap echoed next. The cheering, the insults, the moment the gifts hit the snow, every voice, every face, every witness. The room, moments ago loud with holiday laughter, became a graveyard. Detective Monroe nodded. "That recording is more than sufficient. Under Washington state property law, Ms. Irving is within her rights to enforce immediate termination of tenancy." Garrett's chest rose and fell rapidly. "This can't be happening. You're evicting us? On Christmas Eve?" Jennifer folded her arms. "Your family evicted Melissa first. You just didn't know she was the landlord." That line landed like a hammer. Douglas turned to Mom. "Marilyn, did you know?" Marilyn didn't speak at first. Then softly, "I suspected." The betrayal on Douglas's face wasn't for me. For the first time in years, he looked betrayed by himself. Detective Monroe stepped forward. "Everyone needs to vacate the property immediately. You are trespassing." Patricia sputtered. "You can't throw us out. Where are we supposed to go?" Monroe shrugged. "That isn't Ms. Irving's responsibility." Garrett's panic broke through his pride. "Melissa, come on, we're family." I met his desperate stare. "Were we family when you told 15 people I never helped our parents? When you let them believe you paid for everything I covered? When you slow-clapped while Dad threw my gifts into the snow?" He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Douglas grabbed the door frame as if the wood could steady him. We've lived here for 30 years. This is everything we have. I didn't flinch. And for 3 years, I said softly, you've been living here because I allowed you to. Jennifer addressed the officers. She'll need the property cleared before the locksmith arrives. Monroe nodded. We'll supervise. And just like that, the house erupted. Chaos replacing arrogance. Garrett pacing, Patricia crying, Douglas shouting into a phone that no longer held power, relatives scrambling to grab belongings they thought they owned. I stepped back, watching the unraveling of a dynasty built on delusion. They had celebrated my humiliation an hour ago. Now they were being escorted out of my house. Snow drifted through the open doorway as the last of them shuffled onto the porch, faces pale under the flashing lights. The flip was complete. This wasn't their house. It was mine. And tonight, they finally understood what that meant. The cold outside felt sharper after the police cleared the house, as if the air itself had shifted allegiance. The relatives huddled on the porch, wrapped in thin coats meant for parties, not eviction. The flashing patrol lights cast long, fractured shadows across the snow. Their whispers trembled now, not with superiority, but with fear. Jennifer and I stepped back inside 129 Pinecrest Avenue, the house suddenly quiet in a way I had never experienced growing up here. Calm, controlled, mine. 20 minutes later, after the officers escorted the last relative out, Detective Monroe returned to the doorway. Ms. Irving, the property is secure. Do you want them allowed back in for formal tenant processing? I nodded once. Bring in my parents and my brother only. The others could wait outside in the cold they helped create. Douglas entered first, shoulders drawn tight, face drained of its holiday smugness. Marilyn followed quietly. Garrett came last, moving like someone who had just walked through the wreckage of his own mythology. Jennifer set her leather briefcase on the dining table and opened it with professional precision. The sound of the latch clicking echoed through the room. Mr. and Mrs. Irving, she said, sliding a stack of documents forward. Melissa is prepared to offer a formal rental agreement. Douglas blinked as if the words didn't make sense. Rental agreement? You're letting us stay? For market rate, Jennifer clarified. $8,500 per month. First month, last month, and a security deposit due upon signing. Total $25,500. Garrett choked. You can't be serious. Jennifer lifted a brow. This is standard for a 4-bedroom Victorian in this neighborhood. If anything, it's generous. Douglas sagged into a chair, his voice cracking. We don't have that kind of money. That, Jennifer replied calmly, is not the landlord's concern. The word landlord hit him like a slap. In all his years of self-proclaimed authority, Douglas had never imagined a reality where he wasn't the ruler of this house, much less a tenant begging his daughter for shelter. But tonight, reality didn't need his permission. Jennifer pulled out another document. Additionally, the lease includes a behavioral addendum. No verbal abuse, no public humiliation, no defamatory statements toward the landlord. Garrett stared at her. You can't— Yes, Jennifer interrupted smoothly. We can. One violation results in immediate eviction, no second chances. Marilyn whispered, Olivia, Melissa, please. Her voice broke on my name, but I kept my expression steady. This is business, nothing more. Douglas swallowed hard. You're humiliating us. No, I said quietly. You did that yourselves. I'm just offering terms. Garrett looked between us with wild eyes. If we sign this, we lose everything. You lost everything, Jennifer corrected, when you violated the civility and conduct clause for the 4th time. Silence. Douglas's hand shook as he picked up the pen. His signature, once bold and sweeping, was now a weak line trembling across the page. Marilyn signed next. No hesitation, only sorrow. Then the pen slid to Garrett. He stared at the papers like they were a death sentence, and in a way they were. Not physically, but socially, emotionally. The golden child, the family's pride, reduced to signing a lease like a man who had never supported his parents, never paid a bill, never built anything real. Tears welled in his eyes. This will destroy me. It didn't have to, I replied. You made choices. Now they have consequences. He signed. The ink barely dried before phones across the neighborhood began vibrating. Notifications chimed from every pocket, Mrs. Keller had recorded the entire scene, the police, the shouting, the eviction, and as I stepped toward the large bay window, I saw her standing outside, showing her screen to other neighbors. The caption on her video glowed bright. When the daughter you called worthless turns out to own the house. Within minutes, the clip spread across group chats and local forums. Within an hour, it hit Seattle's social media pages. By morning, it would explode far beyond the city. While we were finalizing signatures, Garrett's phone buzzed incessantly. He ignored it until one call refused to stop. He stepped away to answer. "Mr. Blake?" he said weakly. "Yes, I can explain. No, it's not what it looks like. Please let me." But the man on the other end didn't soothe him, didn't reassure him, didn't save him. Garrett held the phone away as the furious voice blasted through the speaker. Donovan Blake, his American investor, watching the viral eviction video in real time. "You lied about the assets," Blake shouted. "You used a house you don't even own as collateral. We're withdrawing everything. North Peak Analytics is dead." The line went silent. Garrett's face collapsed. He looked up at me, not with anger, not with entitlement, but with something he had never shown before. Fear. Real fear. "Melissa," he whispered, "what am I supposed to do?" For the first time in years, I answered him honestly. "Start over, like the rest of us did without shortcuts." He said nothing. 1 year later, Pinecrest Avenue felt different. The neighbors still nodded to me with a quiet respect they hadn't shown before. Some even stopped me to ask how I was doing, how work was, how the house renovations were going. I always smiled politely. Garrett eventually got a job. Starbucks barista at the Ballard location. He never bragged there. He didn't have anything left to brag about. Douglas became a Walmart greeter on Aurora Avenue, a job he resented but needed. The man who once boasted about carrying the family now told strangers where to find winter coats. Marilyn went to therapy, weekly. She sent me postcards she never asked me to answer. The rent arrived on the 1st of every month, $8,500. On time, always. Sometimes I didn't open the envelopes right away, not out of spite, but because I didn't need the money. Every dollar went directly into the Pinecrest Women in STEM Fund, 5 young women that first year, then 10. Girls who had been silenced or overlooked by their families just like I had been. Girls who deserved better. And whenever I attended a scholarship ceremony or shook the hand of a student whose eyes glowed with possibility, I felt the same quiet realization. My family's downfall wasn't my victory. My freedom was. By spring, the Pinecrest neighborhood had settled into its new rhythm, but the biggest transformation didn't happen inside 129 Pinecrest Avenue. It happened far beyond it, inside quiet classrooms, engineering labs, and student workspaces lit by the soft hum of fluorescent lights. That was where the real legacy now lived, because every rent payment my parents sent, every deposit they made out of reluctance or pride or resignation, went into something larger than all of us, the Pinecrest Women in STEM Fund. It started modestly, 5 scholarships, each for $20,000. 5 young women from difficult households, each of them carrying wounds I recognized immediately. The pain of being overlooked, the sting of being underestimated, the frustration of knowing you were capable while the very people who should cheer for you kept moving the goalposts or pretending they didn't see you at all. There was Sarah Kim, whose father told her coding was for boys with nothing better to do. She showed me her mobile app prototype at the scholarship luncheon. Shy at first, then glowing when I told her it was brilliant. There was Maria Delgado, who balanced engineering classes with a part-time job because her parents insisted money spent on daughters was wasted. Her designs for sustainable water systems looked like something Ridgeview would pay good money to develop. And Leah Thompson, only 19, whose eyes held the familiar hesitation of someone who's been dismissed so often, she learned to speak softly, just to avoid being corrected. She told me she wanted to design earthquake-resistant housing. I told her the world needed minds like hers more than it knew. Each time I shook their hands, each time they thanked me, I felt something inside me rearranged, something tender, something unburdened. Like I was building a foundation not made of concrete or steel, but of every version of the girl I used to be, finally allowed to stand tall. What I didn't expect was how quickly the fund grew. The video of the Pinecrest eviction, the moment my father shouted that it was his house, the officers calmly clarifying it wasn't, spread far beyond Seattle. It bounced across platforms, stitched into commentary videos, reaction streams, podcast discussions. People debated boundaries, entitlement, financial abuse, quiet daughters who turned out to be the backbone of their families. The clip reached corporate circles. It reached philanthropists. It reached women with power and daughters of their own. And within 4 months, Ridgeview Design Group, along with several tech firms along the Seattle waterfront, reached out asking if they could contribute. Amazon matched Ridgeview's donation. Microsoft offered grants. By summer, the Pinecrest Fund had grown to what some called a small miracle. $500,000 pledged for the next academic year. I used to build structures on paper, in models, in CAD files glowing on a monitor at 2 in the morning. But this was a structure built out of second chances and reclaimed stories. And for the first time, no one was standing behind me trying to take credit. 1 year after the eviction, I returned to the University of Washington campus for the fund's annual ceremony. The room buzzed with excitement, a room full of girls who reminded me that resilience is louder than bloodlines. When I walked on stage to speak, I saw a message flash on a screen backstage. Your parents submitted rent early this month. I smiled. Of course they had. I cleared my throat and addressed the audience. A year ago, I began, I learned that sometimes the people who claim to love you will silence you until the day you stop letting them. And sometimes, choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. Faces softened. Several girls nodded. I thought freedom meant leaving something behind, I continued. But freedom can also mean building something new, something that gives others the chances you weren't given. A pause, a breath, a truth I no longer feared. This fund isn't about where I came from, it's about where all of you are going. When the applause rolled across the auditorium, warm and rising, I felt a strange sensation, like a weight I had carried since childhood had finally dissolved. That night, I returned to my condo overlooking the Seattle waterfront, changed out of my suit, and sat by the window as the city lights shimmered across the water. In the distance, I could barely see Pinecrest Avenue. A year ago, I might have stared in that direction with heaviness, with anger, with something unresolved, but not anymore. Now, that house was just a building, a structure, one I managed professionally, without emotion, the way landlords do. My father still avoided looking at me when I stopped by for inspections. My mother tried, softly, hesitantly, to bridge the gap with small kindnesses. Fresh cookies, notes left on the counter. I kept things cordial, businesslike, boundaried. Garrett never attempted reconciliation. Last I heard, he was still working at the Starbucks in Ballard, making lattes for students who unknowingly stood beside a man whose greatest downfall had been believing he was untouchable. As for me, I didn't hate them. They just no longer had access to me. And that was its own kind of peace. By the end of December, I sat in my office at Ridgeview, finalizing architectural plans for the waterfront redevelopment. Outside, the city prepared for another Christmas, lights strung across the boardwalk, carolers drifting past, snow threatening to fall. 1 year earlier, I'd been thrown out into the cold. Now, the warmth I felt had nothing to do with weather. It came from choosing myself, from standing up when silence had been easier, from discovering that walking away wasn't losing a family. It was finding myself. As the clock neared midnight, I pressed save on the final draft of the building design and turned toward the camera I use for storytelling. Before I go, I said softly, if my story meant something to you, if you've ever felt invisible in your own family, please like this video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. And remember this. I looked directly into the lens. Sometimes the best Christmas gift you can give yourself is freedom. Fade out.